Hello, my name is Jeff Litteral. It's Litteral. I work for the state of Colorado in the Division of Reclamation, Mining and Safety. And we have two programs. We have what we call the active mine program that regulates just that, active mines like the revenue or gravel pit operations, coal mines. And then I worked at what is called the inactive mine program, which is the same as abandoned mine lands for pretty much the rest of the country. But in Colorado, when our program started about 20 years ago, the mining community didn't like the word inactive. It kind of meant that, maybe these mines would never be mined again. So given the heritage of mining in Colorado, we went with the inactive mines, but it's basically the same program as abandoned mine lands everywhere else. So thank you for your interest in the UWP's program here. I'm based here in Ouray County as a what we call project manager. We do just that, anything that is pre-law, they call prior to 1977, the Surface Mining Control Reclamation Act, SMCRA is the acronym that required mining companies to have a permit and a bond for any mining activities. These sites that we are working on are sites that didn't ever have a permit and are a responsible party, from prior to the enactment of SMCRA. So a lot of the 1800s gold and silver mining up in the San Juans. I work out in West End, out in uranium country, some of the abandoned uranium mines as well. So any reclamation activities, water quality issues that are related to what we call legacy mining sites, we hope to implement reclamation and projects to improve water quality or clean up mine tailings or waste rock piles, that kind of thing. We also do mine safety closures for BLM Forest Service to safeguard some of these old abandoned mines. We are part of the Department of Natural Resources. Our main office is in Denver, but there's about half a dozen of us that they allow us to work in the field in the mining communities. We get to meet the local folks and participate in things like this that we wouldn't be able to do from necessarily from Denver. We are an arm of what's called the Office of Surface Mining, the federal program. That's where we receive the majority of our funding. We get actually very little state funding. We do get some severance tax. More information on our program, we have a website. It's DRMS, for Division of Reclamation, Mining and Safety.colorado.gov. So if you're driving up Red Mountain Pass, you see all the old historic mine portals and what we call waste rock piles that are outside of the we call the adits. The adits are the horizontal entries that go into the mountain versus a shaft, which is a vertical opening. And a lot of people get confused between waste rock and tailings. So the waste rock is what you see majority of at these sites. That it's just that it's the rock that was separated from the ore that would go to a mill and get processed for tailings, and it's just left there on the site. And sometimes if there's like a water coming out of the adit, it's seeping through that waste rock material and picking up more metals as it flows through the waste rock. And so we've done some diversion projects with the UWP. They were the recipient of a non-point source grant a few years ago, and we helped them implement a few projects that would, one was up on Engineer Pass in Michael Breen, where we did that very thing. The adit water was coming out of the mine and seeping into the waste rock pile, and then picking up more metals as it flowed through. So, and then it also was accumulating in a structure there, loadout structure, and causing some stabilization issues with the mine structure. So we have diverted that water around so it wasn't flowing through the waste rock pile or accumulating there in the loadout structure. So what causes, some of these issues with the water coming out of the mines themselves? There was always, water in the mountain as groundwater, but these mine tunnels exposed that and intercepted these groundwater sources and exposed them to oxygen. And one of the main components of the geology and the rock around that has the metals associated with these mine entries are pyrite. And so pyrite is iron sulfide, and you take the water and expose it to the sulfates in the pyrite, and you get the sulfuric acid. This is what they call acid mine draining. The rock itself is not pure gold. It also had other metals, copper, lead, zinc, cadmium, that were associated with that waste rock. So when that rock is dynamited or blasted out of the mountain and kind of ground up, and it's more exposed to groundwater and water interaction, and as it sits there over time, it interacts with these inside of the portal walls and the waste rock material, and picks up additional heavy metals. And so that's part of the concern for these issues related to the draining mines. And the other thing that interaction does, in the addition of the sulfuric acid with the pyrite, is it lowers the pH, and that can also be a big water quality issue. And we've gone out and done quite a bit of water quality sampling in cooperation with UWP and State Health Department. And we've defined a lot of sites that it may be what we call loads or sources of metals. And so we've been working on trying to come up with solutions to remediate those sites. And we were part of that non-point source grant process, and we're working along towards doing other water quality improvement type projects. Then I guess it was in 2015, you've heard of the Gold King mine spill, and so that kind of set everything back, unfortunately, in response to some of these issues related to before we might put in a bulkhead to seal the water off, or we would go underground to try to find different sources of where the so-called bad water versus good water was coming, and seal those off, or be able to do some kind of passive treatment in some cases. And since it's all the liability issues, I guess, that have been exposed through that Gold King mine spill, it's kind of left us looking for a better path forward. We've heard maybe of Good Samaritan efforts where you can actually do some of these water quality improvement projects and not be held liable. And they've been trying to get this legislation or something passed, administratively through the EPA to allow some of these water quality improvements to occur, and just hasn't happened yet. Actually, doing one project with Trout Unlimited, they have a little more, flexibility when it comes to implementing some of these projects related to the Clean Water Act. And so they were part of a project last year. It's actually a phase 2 on Snuffles Creek on the Atlas Mill tailings. We'd initially applied for a grant to address the tailings, and we're not successful related to some of the land status issues there, but we did install, there was a braid going into from Snaffles Creek through the tailings, and we installed some vane arms to prevent that water from flowing through the tailings. Local contractor Bill Coughlin was helped with the design and implementation of that project, and it's held up really well. And so TU came in this past year and kind of built on what we have done, and again in partnership with the UWP and Ouray Silver Mines as part of mostly their property and a little bit of Forest Service, and they did what we call in situ treatment. They basically took the tailings material and mixed it with some compost and lime and reseeded it and put some wood straw mulch to try to see if we can get something to grow on the tailings there that were fairly benign part of the tailings that were deposited there years ago. And then they also took some of the tailings that were along the creek banks and pulled those back and did some hydrologic controls to keep the water from coming off the mountain down in through the tailings. So those are some of the things we can still do that don't really touch the water, as we say, that's coming out of the adit and the portal. And then we have another project again with TU and the GMUG Forest and Ouray Silver Mines and potentially the EPA as partners to look at what we call the terrible waste rock piles. It's up in Governor Basin, and it's some really acidic, highly erodible waste rock material that's sitting there, and over time it gets snow melt and runoff, and it flows into the creek. And just above these, it's actually the terrible mine, these terrible tailings. Good name for them, I guess, is what's called the Virginius mine, and that was actually mined in the local, like the San Juan tuff. So it's basic, doesn't have the heavy metals associated with it. So the idea is we have this pile above the terrible waste rock pile, and we just simply move that upper pile and cap off the lower terrible piles. Now I have another project over in San Miguel County doing a tailings repository from a historic Matterhorn mill there. Forest Service has funding to cap those, create a repository and make a cap with a liner to isolate those mill tailings so they won't interact with any kind of surface water and kind of take them out of the picture as far as any kind of contamination. We partner a lot with the Uncompahgre Watershed group and have been a member of their steering committee, advisory committee for quite a while. And one of the goals in the Uncompahgre's watershed plan is to delist some of these streams that are what they consider on the 303D list. So they are trying to think of the term that they use for, they have elevated levels of metals. They don't meet the water quality standards, I guess is what I'm thinking. And so they're on this list for, typically cadmium, zinc. And if we can, implement more and more of these projects, the goal is to hopefully get those sites off of that 303D list. That's from the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. So anyway, that's part of what we do, and we really appreciate our partnership with the Uncompahgre Watershed Partnership, and hopefully you are able to support them.